Schönen guten Tag, herzlich willkommen auf Bühne 6 hier bei der Media Convention. Herzlich willkommen zur Session Augmenting Journalism at the New York Times. Für alle, die diese Session gerne auf Deutsch hören wollen, die müssen sich jetzt am besten ein Translation-Gerät da hinten an der Tür hören, denn wir werden jetzt zu Englisch switchen und Sie merken schon, weil in meinem Kopf hadert schon. Trotzdem nochmal die Info auf Deutsch. Wir machen einen Q&A. Sie dürfen gerne Fragen stellen und dann dürfen Sie die Fragen natürlich auch gerne auf Deutsch stellen und wir kriegen das auch irgendwie hin. The hashtag is MCB18 and you're more than welcome to ask questions at the end of this session. But for now, please welcome the Director of Immersive Platforms Storytelling of the New York Times. Please welcome Graham Roberts.
Hello. Thank you guys so much. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to be talking about how we arrived at launching augmented reality at the New York Times. The thinking behind it, the value proposition for it, as well as some of the technical considerations. But before we dive in, I think we should zoom out a little bit to understand kind of where this all fits in. As many of you know, it's a continuing challenge to learn how to take full advantage of the many platforms now available to us as journalists and as storytellers, and to learn to access actually the unique storytelling opportunities that each offers rather than just kind of porting the old way of doing things. And each advancement tends to be additive, meaning we still have to, we still strive to maintain a really great print edition, for example, while also innovating with digital journalism. From a platform perspective, you could easily argue that more has changed in the last decade than in the entire 165-year history of the New York Times. So this has been a really great opportunity for visual journalism. When we combine the incredible history and the mission of the Times with new platforms and technologies, we have a really unique opportunity to create something that's really compelling and also necessary. But now it seems that a new class of platforms is emerging that can be best described as immersive platforms. They're different because of their user interface. The device itself starts to disappear, and more human gestures, look, move, touch, explore, these become the main mode of interaction. So this is really, what we're talking about is the beginning of the next phase in computing, spatial computing. So the work we've done so far in immersive is really just the beginning of this, a way to understand how we can tell compelling stories within this new reality. Apple's Tim Cook stated recently, AR is going to take a while because there are some really hard technology challenges there, but it will happen. It will happen in a big way, and we will wonder when it does how we ever lived without it, like we wonder how we lived without our phones today. So at the Times, we see augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, all these terms, and other platforms that rely on this common mode of interaction as kind of part of a continuum. These immersive platforms, they have the potential really to be as transformational to how people consume journalism as the smartphone. And you can say that the Times really first began to explore immersive storytelling seriously with the launch of NYT VR, which we did at the end of 2015. So here we kind of see the two ways that NYT VR exists, as a native immersive experience in the Oculus or Daydream environment, or as a standalone phone app that you see in the inset. That's not to scale. So NYT VR began as part of the New York Times Magazine in 2015. We would take advantage of the fact that everybody was already walking around with a VR machine in their pockets. So with something as simple as a folded piece of cardboard and some plastic, Google Cardboard, we could unlock that capability and create arguably the biggest VR moment yet in the industry. So in partnership with Google, we sent over 1 million Google Cardboards to our readers with their weekend paper. I think Google had maybe manufactured something like 50,000 of these total at the time, and we were like, how about 1 million? they're Google, so they could do it. So they were really interested in this intersection of legacy media with new media. So it was actually ultimately our print distribution channels that allowed us to introduce the medium of virtual reality to a large audience on a mass scale. And many of us have told us since that the New York Times, through this moment, really helped to create a surge of awareness about VR and move it from something that people talked about at conferences to a household term. So since then, we've produced an incredibly diverse collection of really ambitious VR journalism projects, taking our viewers to some really incredible places that they're unlikely to otherwise go. So in Under a Cracked Sky, we take you on a journey with science support divers below the frozen ocean, under 8 feet of Antarctic sea ice, and into some of the clearest water on Earth. So viewers actually get the experience of plunging through a small hole in the ice to dive with seals, to explore ice caves, to glide past stalactites of frozen seawater and swim over this kind of rocky black seabed crawling with life. So yeah, we've used this medium now to cover everything from sports to culture to conflict. We've taken readers to the top of the World Trade Center. We've taken them to Mecca. We've taken them to Danakil, Ethiopia. We've taken them to the past. And with a little help from NASA, we've taken them 3 billion miles away to Pluto. So we continue this work essentially with the idea that this kind of immersive storytelling is a powerful way to transport our readers, to help them understand stories through a sense of place and through a sense of presence. So as we've expanded our immersive storytelling scope to include augmented reality, we've needed to decide, what perspective would we take? In the most general sense, I guess, we feel that if virtual reality takes you there, then augmented reality can bring the news to you. And it should become clear, I think, what I mean by this as I continue to explain our approach. So we began exploring AR seriously at the beginning of 2017 with the perspective that we were mostly interested in what I'd call next generation AR. So that's not just the marker-based AR that's really been around for quite some time now, really from the beginning of the decade. And we even made our own pretty bad experiments, all the way back in 2011, I think, where we took a model of a World Trade Center and tried to have a target-based AR thing. It's not great, but it was early and we were trying things. But this way of doing things is really sticky for some reason. This is very recent. This whole idea of target-based AR has really stuck around. And now you've probably seen this experience come up every year from magazines where they make their covers become animated or something like that. This is a really fun use, but personally, it just really doesn't seem necessary to me. And it kind of always feels like a gimmick a bit. And not actually a way that people want to interact with print media, in my opinion. So at the beginning of 2017, reaching any kind of audience with this next generation of AR really meant one thing. It meant Google Tango. So Tango is a combination of software and hardware like depth sensors that's really only available on a very limited number of phones. So if you have a Lenovo phablet, I think you're set. But so this was great though because it really helped us start to understand what AR could be about and kind of, what it could be about when you freed the need of your phone to point at something, to point at a stationary target. But by the summer of 2017, something kind of monumental happened, and that was Apple's announcement of AR Kit. So now these kind of experiences that were really only possible on Tango would now be accessible by millions of devices that people already owned. It was kind of like the Google Cardboard moment, but now AR. So with this in mind, we spent a week last summer creating basically a working example of what AR could be at the time. So we wanted to create a fully integrated approach. So rather than having AR be kind of like a press play, that's the whole experience kind of thing, it would become these moments that came within the reading experience. So they would come directly inside of our articles. I think overall, interacting with AR is a very kind of novel experience, and kind of like the mouse was in 1984 or something. So from my perspective, the reader doesn't really know what to do yet. It kind of requires still a lot of hand-holding, and I don't think they're really ready for the whole story to be told in AR necessarily. So as moments, we actually allow the AR to be just part of the story and let the words, the photos, other media kind of surround these AR moments and provide that context that's needed. So to kind of figure this out, we just took a story about the Greek and Roman gallery at the Met in New York as an experiment and reimagined what that article could look like if it included AR moments. So we built a sample of how this might work using Unity. So this is a demo we shot of what that looked like. So the idea was that when you're reading the AR article, you would always be in AR, even when you weren't. Meaning, even during the reading part of the experience, your phone would kind of feel like a window, and the words would flow over this window. And then when something would be augmented into your space, the window would clarify, and the object would appear as if it were really there. So we captured these sculptures actually by just going to the Met and just using a cell phone. So then these were processed into these three-dimensional representations that could be presented to readers, and this is important, in real scale. So when you're done looking at a particular sculpture, all you do is you keep scrolling to keep reading. Oh, there's the little background jazz. You really missed out not having that the whole time. Okay. So this whole concept of scale was really immediately intriguing. It's a clearly valuable use case for AR. It's hard to give a sense of scale on a phone otherwise, but now we can capture important news objects photographically in 3 dimensions and then present them to our readers in true size. So that was a Confederate statue, and that was big in the news. We could show you the actual Confederate statue in real size, and these were some Trump border wall designs in real scale in the New York Times lobby. That's really the only way to understand it, I think. So, build the wall. Okay. So at this point, we've narrowed our editorial vision for AR to basically a few fundamental ideas. So with AR, we can give perspective through scale, regain the resolutions and impact of our visual journalism, which, as many of you have experienced, has been somewhat constrained in this mobile age. Create a more human mode of interaction. By this, I mean, so we are 3D beings, obviously, in a 3D world. So the most natural way to show you something that is inherently 3-dimensional might be to put it in front of you in space. We don't need the abstractions of pinch to zoom or swipe or tap. If you want to see something from another angle, you walk around it. If you want to see it up close, you can just walk up to it. And we can also lean into the future of visual storytelling, in which our physical and digital worlds begin to come together in a more natural way as part of this shift towards spatial computing. So now that we had our kind of editorial vision, our perspective, the supporting technology in place, the real challenge kind of lay ahead. Unlike the approach with VR, we didn't want to launch AR as a standalone app. The whole concept of AR being moments meant, within these articles really necessitated that we build the functionality into our core news app. This would make, obviously, everything way more complicated, and it would also compete with everything else that the Times is doing and other things on the list. So, in addition, it kind of was a way that this would work that, to some extent, we needed to invent. So this became a really major collaboration between our product, design, and newsroom teams. So the starting point was that Met demo that we just watched. Now we kind of needed to arrive at the technical solution that would become a handshake between the native app and the web layer. The reason for this was that at this point, the technology is really not supported enough to be web only. So we kind of made sure that the AR part of the experience would be processed on the native side, to get a little technical about it. But we could still build our articles through the web as we have skill sets and experience doing. And we would kind of create this hybrid that would give us both the performance and the publishing flexibility that we would need. We also realized we kind of had to explain what augmented reality actually was to our audience, why we were pursuing it, and how we thought it might, or potentially could add to our journalism. So for this purpose, we published an AR preview article that actually launched as our first real, true AR project. But this was essentially, this is the first AR article we put out, and it contained all of the design considerations that we wanted, including this kind of frosted window look. And it was also this opportunity to give readers a chance to kind of try out AR for themselves. So as an example, readers can now place an old New York Times newspaper vending machine, which is called an honor box, because I guess you're on your honor to take only one copy at a time, into your space. And we felt this was a good kind of sample because we could capture it photographically, present it in real scale in your space, and also we could demonstrate a kind of compare and contrast with how we would otherwise show you this thing, which would be simply to put a small photo on your phone. And I think that contrast kind of helps people to understand what the potential is for the technology. So I was really happy that some people seem to really understand, thank you, Alternative Chad, what the potential of this is, that this was an example, and that this served as kind of a teaching tool. But others not so much, not everyone. You can't please everybody, I guess. But it was it was really interesting to kind of see this honor box all of a sudden pop up all around the world, which is when I realized that this was the wrong example. It should have been one of those garden gnomes showing up everywhere outside someone's house. So, moving on. So we chose the Olympics as the kind of the perfect launch vehicle. It's one of our biggest pre-planned coverage events, and the timing is really well suited to our development. So through their phones, readers are able to meet world-class Olympic competitors up close. So the idea was, what if you could, freeze Nathan Chen mid-quad, walk out onto the ice, to explore his form and learn a little bit about what makes him so great interactively. We asked each athlete to demonstrate his or her form at specific moments. So Nathan Chen held a pose showing exactly how he positions his arms tightly to his body during his quads to allow for an incredible rate of rotation. So this is one of our AR makers, Karthik, doing a scan of speed skater J.R. Chelsky. That's a little image of what comes out of that. So for the AR experience, we would place these scans into context. For example, placing Nathan Chen at the 20-inch height off of the ground that he would actually be mid-quad. So this was based off of photo reference and also sometimes motion capture. And then in your space, because this is all real scale, he will actually truly be a distance of 20 inches off the ground and his true height. We also programmed interactivity into these graphics to help you discover more as you walk around. So as you crouch down to Chelsea's level as he makes his turn, for instance, we highlight the angle that he needs to maintain. He needs to maintain that speed and trajectory. So interacting with augmented reality is, of course, a pretty unfamiliar notion for most people, so we had to kind of develop an intuitive way to display information around the graphic. So just as readers know how to read a story on a phone because we're conditioned to read left to right, we decided to organize information about how one would naturally interact with a space, which is simply to walk around inside it. So as you circle the athlete, you enter different kind of information zones that are appropriate to that particular perspective in which you are viewing them. So as you enter a zone, you'll feel a subtle haptic cue on the phone, and you'll be presented with a little bit of information about that perspective that you're in. So the interaction design was really something that we gave a lot of thought to. A lot of AR apps, like those developed by Quartz and Google and others, really rely on a lot of touch-based interaction. For example, letting you pinch to zoom to change the scale of an AR object or interactively place it in space. We decided from the start that we would have no touch interaction with the AR. This was for some practical reasons, as you might imagine, because we're actually putting these moments inside of an article, and we need to save a lot of that touch interaction for the interacting with the article itself. But it was also kind of a bit of a philosophical question about what you should actually do with AR. So as I mentioned earlier, part of how we are approaching this is thinking about it as a leaning into the future of spatial computing. So eventually, there will be no screen really to pinch and zoom on. So I wanted that readers would kind of interact with the items as if they were there. To kind of see something up close, you'll really need to walk up to it. And it's kind of like we're thinking as, walking is the new scrolling. It's the natural interaction for this medium that you would do. So this does kind of highlight how designing AR now, which is on phones for the most part, is really different from designing AR for the emerging platforms that will be offering more of like a heads-up display kind of experience. There will be many similarities, but both platforms kind of offer different challenges and opportunities. There have been some really interesting AR experiments that leverage the fact of AR on a phone in interesting ways, like this recent Google project, which kind of lets you draw in AR with using touch inputs. So here, AR is designed specifically for the presence of a touch screen. So I think that's kind of one decision that's really worth considering from the beginning is how much this should be about AR specifically on a phone, or a more general kind of AR that would apply to what our platforms, may look like in a few years from now. In parallel to this, things like floating persistent screens, which kind of make a lot of sense on the AR that we might see through glasses, but will make really little sense on a phone. I don't think anyone wants to see a large screen from the perspective of a smaller screen, do they? I don't know. Maybe. But the point being, do we want to think about AR on phones as a very specific experience in of itself? Or do we want to think of it as more of a bridge to what comes next? So, those things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but to me personally, I think that the phone is a pretty imperfect vehicle for delivering AR experiences. And so I prefer to kind of imagine it as a bridge to the kind of truly groundbreaking experience of information that spatial computing could bring. So going back to our Olympics AR for a second, I wanted to point out that we also needed to consider the readers who would not have access to the AR experience at this point. Desktop, mobile web, at this point Android, older phones. We didn't want the experience to feel any less considered, so we used the same assets we captured to build what we're calling kind of a fallback mode that works otherwise. So at the end of March, we published our second AR feature, which is a culture piece on the visual legacy of David Bowie. This started with a search for an AR project that would be appropriate for March timing, which would be when we would first add support for Android devices to coincide with the availability of AR Core, which would be Google's answer to ARKit. Cast a wide net around the newsroom for what our Olympics follow-up should be. The culture desk suggested this David Bowie is exhibit, which once I saw the pieces there seemed like a great use for this. But we were going to really have to up our ability to capture things. If we were going to present art objects to people, they had to be really, really good. So we began to explore different methods for capturing these objects and landed basically on a three-pronged approach. We would use an iPad with structure scanner, as we did for the Olympics, a higher-end scanner called the Artec EVA, and a just doing straight photogrammetry with a DSLR. We did a lot of tests, jackets with shiny materials, people, really difficult shapes like plants. Eventually, we graduated to the closest thing we had in the office to a David Bowie costume, which was the Santa that gets dragged out to our sort of depressing holiday party every year. Initial results were not great, but we ended up kind of using a combination of all three methods to really pull it off. So the museum was game to work with us on this project. They gave us special advanced access to some of his iconic outfits. We scanned these over the course of one day using all these methods. And the challenge became really maintaining the quality while having it actually perform on a phone. So a lot of the work ended up being reducing the geometry to a form that would become a scaffold for the photography and actually be able to play on like an iPhone 6S. So the experience in the end, I think, is really effective. We can provide the experience of bringing pieces of the exhibit to you and letting you interact with them as if they're really there. So I'm really excited for this use case of VR. It feels kind of like a new kind of photojournalism to me, and we're also creating this really amazing digital record of these items. So this is really just the beginning of this. Our ability, I think, to bring news objects at scale to our readers in qualities that will be highly accurate to the originals will really only improve. And I think that this technique can be extended past art objects into the field, really. So I have a little bit more, but I'm getting a flashing red thing on the screen. So I could take 5 minutes more, or we could cut it there. What do you say? Okay.
Get one question from the audience. Thanks so much, Graham, for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll take one question from the audience, and then Graham, but you're still here for a little bit of time, right? People can approach you and ask questions, right?
I think I'm still here. Yeah.
We'll take the one here in the front. Do we have the microphone? Yeah.
One question, that's pressure.
One question. This one better be good.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
No pressure. I used to work in online news production a while ago, and the New York Times was always really at the forefront of this development and did really interesting, cool stuff, but already like 4 years ago. And looking at the online product now, it's still very much classic online news consumption. So I'm wondering, do you also look at the type of ways that people consume news, and if there's any signs that there might be a breakthrough for this, and that it will really change the way that people consume news? Because usually technology uptake is not coming from how cool the technology is, but from other drivers outside of the technology itself.
Is the question about hardware? kind of the actual things we're using to...
No, it's more about users and what they really need and what they will use in the end of the day, because a lot of the cool stuff that the New York Times did in the past never really made it through, the classic product.
Well, if I understand the question, I think you mean whether people are coming to news through social means instead of through a regular app, or the sources of the news. I'm sure. Sorry.
Yeah, I definitely failed the good question test. No, I mean it's a great investment from the company's side. And why are you making that investment? Do you really see that people will consume news differently in the future? And why do you think so? Because in the past, a lot of the really, cutting edge stuff didn't really get picked up so much by the general news consumers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're not suggesting that all of a sudden everyone's going to consume news in AR. These things are all additive. They're on top of everything else that is still really important. Just like written story on breaking news is still just as important as all of this. But it's it's really important that news organizations innovate. We've seen what happens when we don't innovate, when the technologies start to change. That's why we make this investment in this kind of work. It's to understand it. It's to make at least some kind of a bet on it, so that we can move with innovation as things change and stay relevant. Not everything is going to be huge. This is brand new. I really don't know what's going to happen with this, but I think it's really important that we explore these things so that we can understand them.
Thank you very much, Graham Roberts. Und wir machen direkt weiter mit der nächsten Session. This next session will be in German, so if you don't understand German, get a translation device right in the back. More people are coming in, some are going out, so we'll take 2 minutes. Okay?